I always thought family was supposed to be the one place where you didn't have to earn your value, the place where you could relax, be yourself, and know people were on your side no matter what. That's what I believed growing up. And honestly, I held on to that belief longer than I should have. I was the reliable one in my family, the calm one, the person everyone called when something went wrong. If someone needed money, I helped. If someone needed a ride, I drove across town without thinking. Twice. If there was an argument, I was the one trying to keep the peace. I didn't mind it at first. It felt good to be needed. It made me feel like I had a role, like I mattered. My older brother Daniel was different. He was loud, confident, and somehow always the center of attention. People laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. My parents excused his mistakes because that's just how he is. When he messed up, it was temporary. When I made a mistake, it felt like a lesson I was supposed to learn from. I got used to that dynamic. I stopped expecting things to be equal. I told myself it didn't matter because we were family, and family wasn't about keeping score. Years passed like that. Same birthdays, same Sunday dinners, same conversations. I helped set the table, cleaned up afterward, listened to everyone's problems. People called me responsible, dependable, mature. I thought those were compliments. I didn't realize they were also expectations. The night everything. It was my mother's birthday, and the house was full of noise. My aunt arguing about politics, cousins laughing, the smell of food everywhere. Daniel arrived late, like he always did, and instantly the energy shifted. Everyone greeted him like the main event had just arrived. I smiled and hugged him. Nothing felt unusual yet. Dinner started normally, but halfway through, the conversation turned toward money and problems, something that happened often. In our family, Daniel sighed loudly and said he was going through a rough patch. I already felt my stomach tighten because I knew where this was heading. He explained he had made a bad investment and needed help covering expenses for a while. My father looked at me immediately, not at Daniel, at me. It wasn't even subtle. That look carried years of expectation. My mother said softly, "Maybe you could help your brother out." I asked how much, trying to stay calm. When Daniel said the number, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't a small favor. It was a serious amount of money. Money I had planned for my own bills and future. For the first time, I hesitated. I opened my mouth to explain that I couldn't afford it right now, but Daniel laughed and said, "Come on, you're the stable one. You'll be fine." Everyone chuckled. Like it was obvious. Like my money wasn't really mine, just something waiting to be used when the family needed it. I looked around the table and realized something uncomfortable. Nobody was asking if I could help. They were assuming I would. I took a breath and said quietly, "I can't." The room went silent. Forks stopped moving. Conversations froze. My mother blinked at me like she hadn't heard correctly. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I can't do it," I repeated, softer this time. Daniel laughed again, but there was tension in it now. "You're joking, right?" I shook my head. The mood changed instantly. My father leaned back, arms crossed. My aunt stopped. Smiling, Daniel's face hardened in a way I had never seen directed at me. "After everything we've done for you," he said. The words hit me hard. I wanted to ask what exactly that meant, but I stayed quiet. I felt everyone watching me. My mother sighed and said I was being selfish. Selfish. That word echoed in my head. Years of saying yes. Years of helping without question. And the first time I said no, suddenly I was selfish. Daniel pushed his chair back and muttered that he didn't expect this. From me. The rest of dinner continued. But I felt invisible. People talked around me, not to me. The warmth in the room was gone. When I left that night, my mother hugged me, but it felt distant. She whispered that I should think about what kind of person I wanted to be. I drove home replaying everything in my head. I had only said no. That was it. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said no. The next morning, my phone was quiet. No messages in the family group chat. No jokes, no memes, nothing. At first, I thought people just needed time, but the silence stretched into days. Then the messages started coming. Not from my parents, from extended family. I heard what happened. Your brother really needed you. Family should come first. I stared at my phone, confused. How did everyone know already? And why did it sound like I had done something terrible? That's when I realized someone had told the story and it wasn't me. I sat alone that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside me. For the first time, I wondered if my family ever really saw me, or if they only saw what I could give them. And deep down, a quiet fear started growing. Because if saying no once caused this reaction, I didn't know what would happen next. The days after that dinner felt wrong, like something invisible had shifted and everyone knew except me. Messages kept coming, each one colder than the last. Some were polite, but disappointed. Others were more direct, telling me What bothered me most wasn't the criticism, it was the fact that nobody asked what actually happened. Nobody asked why I said no. They already had a version of the story, and I was clearly the bad guy in it. At first, I told myself it would pass. Families fight, people cool down, things go back to normal. But normal didn't come back. A week later, my mother called. Her voice sounded careful, almost formal. She said the family was having dinner again on Sunday and that I should come. Something about the way she said it made me uneasy, but I agreed anyway. Part of me hoped this was the moment things would reset, the moment someone would finally ask for my side. When I walked into my parents' house that Sunday, I felt the tension immediately. Conversations paused for a second before continuing. Smiles felt forced. I sat down and tried to act normal, but it felt like I was walking into a room where everyone already had an opinion about me. Dinner? Started quietly. Small talk. Safe topics. But it didn't take long for things to shift. My aunt mentioned how stressed Daniel had been lately. Someone else said that families should always support each other. I kept my eyes on my plate, waiting for someone to actually talk to me instead of around me. Finally, my father cleared his throat and said, "We just don't understand why you reacted like that." I looked up. Reacted how? He frowned. Refusing to help your brother when he needed you. My chest tightened. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not caring, that I simply couldn't afford it right now. But before I could finish, Daniel interrupted. "You could have helped," he said. "You just didn't want to." A few people nodded. That hurt more than I expected. In that moment, I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a judgment. They weren't trying to understand me. They were trying to confirm the story they already believed. My mother sighed and said she was disappointed because she thought I valued family more. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. I wanted to remind her of all the times I had said yes. The rides, the money, the last-minute favors. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone in a room full of people who were supposed to know me best. After dinner, I overheard my cousin whispering in the kitchen. She said maybe success had made me selfish. I froze for a second, realizing how far the story had spread. I left early that night, saying I had work in the morning. Nobody tried to stop me. The drive home felt heavier than before. I kept replaying everything, trying to figure out how saying no once had turned into this version of me that I barely recognized. The next few weeks were worse. Family group chats went quiet whenever I spoke. Plans were made without me. Photos showed up online of gatherings I hadn't been invited to. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just small exclusions that slowly added up. One evening I saw a picture of Daniel at a barbecue at my parents' house, smiling with everyone around him. The caption said, "Family always comes first." I stared at it for a long time, feeling something inside me sink. A few days later, I ran into my aunt at the grocery store. She smiled politely and asked how I was doing, but her tone felt awkward. After a moment, she said, "I hope you and Daniel work things out. He's been really hurt." I blinked. Hurt? I asked what she meant, and she hesitated before saying that Daniel told everyone he was close to losing his apartment because I refused to help, and that I had said some harsh things during dinner. My stomach dropped. That wasn't what happened at all. I barely said anything that night. Suddenly, everything made sense. The messages, the coldness, the judgment. They weren't reacting to what I did. They were reacting to a story Daniel had told. I drove home angry, shaking a little. For the first time, I felt something stronger. Then guilt. I felt betrayed. Not just by Daniel, but by everyone who believed him without asking me. I sat on my couch, staring at my phone, thinking about calling someone to explain my side. But who would listen? They had already chosen what to believe. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the times I had helped Daniel quietly, never asking for credit, never exposing his mistakes. And now he was painting me as selfish. A few days later, my mother called again. She said Daniel was struggling and the family wanted to talk things through. The way she said it felt less like concern and more like pressure. I told her I needed some time. She went quiet, then said, "I don't recognize you anymore." That sentence stayed in my head long after the call ended. I started pulling back after that. Not out of revenge, just exhaustion. I stopped replying immediately to messages. I stopped offering help before being asked. For the first time in years, I focused on my own life. And, strangely, it felt peaceful. The constant pressure I didn't even realize I was carrying started to fade. But the more distance I created, the more they framed me as the problem. One evening, I got a long message from Daniel. He said he couldn't believe I was tearing the family apart over money, that everyone was disappointed in me, that I needed to fix things. I read it 3 times. He wasn't asking for understanding. He was demanding obedience. That's when something clicked in my mind. Maybe this wasn't about one dinner. Maybe this was about years of expectations I had quietly accepted. I didn't reply. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Cousins, aunts, even family friends sending messages about forgiveness and family unity. It felt coordinated, like a wave pushing me back into the role I had always played. I sat there holding my phone, feeling strangely calm. Because for the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. The moment I stopped being useful, I became the problem. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over yet. Something bigger was coming. The strange thing about stepping back from people is that you start seeing things more clearly. When the noise fades, patterns appear. For the first time in years, my life felt quieter. I focused on work, spent time alone, and slowly started feeling like myself again. But the calm didn't last long. The more distance I created, the more pressure came from my family. Missed calls turned into long messages. Messages turned into guilt. Guilt turned into accusations. One afternoon, my mother showed up at my apartment without warning. The moment I opened the door, I could see disappointment written all over her face. She walked inside like she was trying to understand what had changed about me. She said everyone was worried, that I was isolating myself, that this wasn't like me. I almost laughed because what she really meant was that I wasn't playing my usual role anymore. She sat down and told me Daniel was struggling badly and felt abandoned. I asked her quietly if anyone had asked why I said no that night. She paused, surprised by the question. Then she said, "It doesn't matter. Family helps family. That was her answer. Not curiosity, not concern, just expectation. After she left, I sat there feeling heavier than before. It wasn't just Daniel. It was the whole system. I grew up in a system where saying yes made you good and saying no made you selfish. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot from social media. It was a post Daniel had written about betrayal and fake loyalty. He didn't mention me by name, but the details were obvious. People were commenting with sympathy, calling him strong, saying he deserved better. Some of those comments were from family members. I stared at the screen, feeling anger rise in my chest. He was turning a private situation into a public performance, and everyone was cheering him on. That night, I finally talked to someone outside the family. I met my friend Laura for coffee. She listened as I told her everything, the dinner, the messages, the way everyone had turned on me. When I finished, she asked a simple question. Has Daniel ever paid you back for anything? I thought about it. The small loans, the favors, the times I dropped everything to help. The answer was obvious. No, I said. She nodded and said gently, it sounds like they're used to you fixing things, and now they don't know what to do without that. Hearing it out loud felt uncomfortable, but true. A few days later, my cousin Emily called me. We weren't especially close, so I was surprised. She sounded nervous and asked if we could meet. When we sat down at a small cafe, she looked around like she didn't want anyone to hear us. She said she felt bad about how everyone had been treating me and that she didn't think the full story was being told. Apparently, Daniel had been telling people that I refused to help, even though I had plenty of money, that I insulted him at dinner, and that I thought I was better than the rest of the family. My jaw tightened. None of that was true. Emily hesitated before adding that she had seen him asking other relatives for money too, and telling each one a slightly different version of the story. That was the first real crack in his narrative. I went home feeling a mix of relief and anger. Relief that someone finally saw what was happening. Anger that it took so long. For the first time, I thought about defending myself publicly, telling everyone exactly what happened. But I was tired of fighting for understanding from people who never asked for my side. So I stayed quiet and waited. Then came a phone call that shifted everything. My father called late at night, something he never did. His voice sounded tense. He asked if I knew anything about Daniel's finances. I said no. There was a long pause before he admitted that Daniel had asked him for a large amount of money to promising it was temporary. Apparently, this wasn't the first time. I could hear confusion in my father's voice, like the image he had of Daniel was starting to crack. Before hanging up, he said quietly, maybe things aren't exactly how we thought. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first sign that doubt was spreading. Over the next week, small things started changing. Messages from family felt less accusatory. My aunt sent a short text asking how I was doing. My cousin liked one of my posts again. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted. It felt like the story Daniel told was starting to unravel on its own. Then I got a message from Daniel. This time, it wasn't angry. It was short and polite. He asked if we could talk privately. I stared at the message for a long time before agreeing. We met at a quiet park. He looked tired, less confident than usual. For a while, he talked about stress and misunderstandings, avoiding eye contact. Then he admitted he might have exaggerated a little when talking to the family because he felt embarrassed. A little. That was how he described weeks of turning everyone against me. I asked him why he didn't just tell the truth. He shrugged and said he needed support. That answer told me everything. It was never about honesty. It was about control. Then he asked if I could help him now, just once, to fix things. The irony almost made me laugh. Even after everything, he still expected me to step back into the same role. looked at him and realized something surprising. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt clear. I told him no again, calmly. His expression hardened for a moment, then softened into resignation. We parted without hugging. That night, my mother texted me saying she had talked to Daniel and that maybe there had been misunderstandings. I read the word over and over. It felt like a small attempt to move on without admitting anyone was wrong. Still, it was the first sign that the truth was surfacing. For the first time since that dinner, I felt something close to relief. Not because everyone suddenly understood me, but because I finally understood them. The roles we played, the expectations we never talked about, the way saying no exposed things that had been hidden for years. And deep down, I knew one last conversation was coming. The one that would decide whether anything could really change. The week after I talked to Daniel felt strangely calm. The tension that had been building for months didn't disappear, but it settled into something quieter. Messages from family became neutral. Nobody accused me anymore, but nobody apologized either. It felt like everyone wanted to move forward without talking about what really happened. Part of me wanted to accept that just to avoid more conflict. Another part knew that if I did, nothing would actually change. A few days later, my mother called and said the family was having dinner again on Sunday. Her voice sounded softer than usual. She said, "Everyone missed me and hoped I would come." I hesitated. The last time I sat at that table, everything fell apart. But something told me this was important, not for them, but for me. So I said yes. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different, quieter. People greeted me with careful smiles, like they weren't sure what was safe to say. Daniel was already there, avoiding eye contact. My father nodded at me in a way that felt almost respectful. We sat down, and for a while the conversation stayed. Light work, weather, small jokes. It felt fragile, like everyone was trying not to touch the wrong subject. Eventually, my mother sighed and said she wanted us to talk openly. The room went still. She said families go through hard moments and that maybe everyone had misunderstood each other. I noticed she avoided saying anyone was wrong. Daniel shifted in his chair but stayed quiet. Then my father looked at me and said, "Maybe we expected too much from you." The words surprised me. It wasn't a full apology, but it was honest enough that I felt something inside me loosen. I took a breath and spoke calmly. I said I loved them, but loving someone didn't mean always saying yes. I explained that I had spent years trying to keep peace, trying to be the reliable one, and that I didn't realize how much pressure I was carrying until I finally said no. I told them how it felt to be judged without being asked my side. The room stayed silent while I spoke. Nobody interrupted. My mother's eyes. She said she never meant to make me feel used. Daniel finally looked at me and admitted he handled things badly. He said he felt embarrassed and panicked, and that he told the story in a way that made him look better. Hearing him say it out loud felt strange. Not satisfying, just clarifying. For weeks I had doubted myself, wondering if I had really done something wrong. Now I knew I hadn't, and something unexpected happened in that moment. I realized I didn't need to win. Didn't need them to fully agree with me. The anger I had been carrying slowly faded, replaced by something calmer acceptance. Dinner continued, and the mood slowly. People started talking normally again. But I noticed something important. The dynamic had changed. For the first time, nobody looked at me expecting me to fix anything. Nobody asked me for help. I was just there, not the problem solver, not the peacemaker, just myself. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. He said he was proud of me for speaking honestly. That sentence meant more than he probably realized. Growing up, I spent years trying to earn approval I never fully felt. Hearing it now felt like closing a chapter I didn't know I needed to close. As I was leaving, Daniel walked me to the door. He apologized again, more quietly this time. He said he didn't realize how much pressure he had put on me over the years. I nodded, but didn't rush to make him feel better. The old version of me would have. This time I just said, I hope we both do better. It felt honest, balanced. Driving home, I thought about how different everything felt compared to the night I first said no. Back then, I felt guilty, scared, like I had broken something. Now I understood that saying no didn't break anything, it revealed what was already fragile. Over the next few weeks, things didn't magically become perfect. Some family members still kept their distance. Some conversations, I stopped feeling responsible for everyone's happiness. I stopped jumping in to fix problems that weren't mine. And strangely, the more boundaries I set, the more respect I started receiving. One evening, my mother called just to talk. No requests, no pressure. We laughed about small things, and for the first time in a long time, the conversation felt easy. Before hanging up, she said she admired how strong I had been through everything. Hearing that made me realize how much had shifted not just in them, but in me. Looking back, the day I said no wasn't the day I lost my family. It was the day I finally saw them clearly. The day I understood that love without boundaries turns into expectation, and expectation quietly turns into resentment. Saying no forced everyone, including me, to face the roles we had been playing for years. And the biggest surprise was this. Once I stopped trying to hold everything together, nothing actually fell apart. People adjusted. They learned. I learned. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said yes that night. Maybe things would have stayed comfortable. Maybe everyone would have kept smiling. But I would still be carrying the weight of being the person who never says no. I would still believe my value came from what I could give. Instead, I learned something different. The day I said no to my family was the day they showed who they really were, but it was also the day I finally discovered who I was. And for the first time in my life, that felt enough.